Isn't it like this?
Okay, they're gonna start here. I'll put it on TV. I'll sit over here.
Oh, I forgot we were. What is the topic of this?
I think it's like,
Turn the volume up on here and
This is crazy. I love
Oh,
it.
no,
though.
it's-
Oh my God, so
63
weird.
participants are on.
65.
I like it.
I can't hear anything.
How about now? Hooray. We're going to be in trouble if I'm the technician. I can tell you that. Hi, everybody.
I have faith in you, Kitty.
Good afternoon and welcome to this mini training, this informal mini training on TEFAP and food pantry operations. My name is Kitty Kokel and I'm pleased to be with you. I work for the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. And our hosts today is the organization known as Feed My People up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And Leah Jadicke is our host for the day. I'm not officially recording this from the department, but you're welcome to record any or all of this you want to or don't. I also want you to know that there's probably 100% likelihood that I'll be repeating these sessions. I know that some people wanted to go to the What is TEFAP session. Don't worry about it. I'm going to offer it again before the end of the year. And in addition, I'll probably offer additional civil rights trainings because not only, of course, do you guys need those trainings, but if you wanted to invite your volunteers to participate in a training like that, that would count for their annual civil rights training. So we're going to try to offer that to you just for simplicity. So I'm about to get rolling here. Leah, do you have anything you'd like to say before I jump into the material?
If anyone was on the call last time, it worked well. It worked well to just pop your questions into the chat if you wanted, or there will be sometimes 4 questions, but whichever you prefer.
Yeah, and it's better to stay muted for now, but I'll make sure that if you have any questions, we get them answered. And Leah, if you could do me the big fat favor of keeping an eyeball on the chat.
Yep.
If there are questions that are really specific and germane to a particular area, it's easier for us to catch those questions while we're there. If you have general and more philosophical questions, or those might be better at the end. So with that, folks, we're going to get rolling. So today's session is about serving participants. And I think that this is about the who. It's not only about the who we're serving, but it's also about who is serving them. And so it's people meeting people in a food pantry, as we know. And even though during the pandemic, the shape and the experience has been different, you know, the philosophy about who we're serving is kind of still the same. Some people call the people they're serving clients. Some people call them participants. Some people call them recipients. Some people will call them neighbors. Your own pantry has its own unique approach to serving people, but our goal, of course, is to feed people and do it in a way that gives them the most positive experience that they can have, with the most dignity that we can possibly provide, and have our volunteers have an equally positive experience. I think it's just really important to think about that exchange, because that exchange is what keeps people with you and working with you throughout your pantry operations. So you're going to be setting, as a pantry operator, you're going to be setting a tone for the human to human contact that happens in your pantry. And the tone that you set is going to be the example that other people are going to follow. And so some food pantries, and I recommend this, actually have a customer service policy that's written down. And there's one in the TEFAP manual. All of you had, I think we're given a link to the manual that we use in TEFAP. And you'll see if you go through the index, there's quite a bit in there about serving people, and we're going to go over most of it. But there's also a sample of a customer service policy. And I think that everybody being grounded in the same vision of what we're about here, what are we doing here, helps tremendously. And it's not just the person-to-person interaction, it even goes down to the food. I've seen myself, and I've only been in this business for a little over 9 years, but I've seen myself a real change also in our thinking about food and who we're serving. I think for a long time, there was an impression that some people had that, people who were needy and hungry, there were certain foods that we gave them. Macaroni and cheese, I'm just going to use that as an example. Well, there's nothing really wrong with eating macaroni and cheese once in a while, but it shouldn't be a staple food in people's lives. And I think all of us, as we've come to learn more about food and appreciate the real importance of fresh and healthy food in our food system and providing fresh and healthy food, we also have a different mindset about what we want to provide these people and why. And the bottom line is a human body builds healthy cells based on the food that we put into it. And everybody needs to build healthy cells, no matter where they live, no matter what their income is, no matter what their circumstances are. When we think about the people we serve, we also know that there are some people we see on a regular basis, and we probably know them by name. There are other people we see only fleetingly, only very short periods of time, maybe a couple months, and maybe we never see them again. And so there's all different types of relationships that people have with a food pantry, as we know. And so that's another thing that's useful to think about as we're serving people. And I also think, going back to the framework and the tone, and considering the food that we provide, we also have an extremely we have a workforce that's really tilted towards seniors. All of us do. And so with that workforce comes life experiences that also inform how people think about food. And I know, my parents lived through the Depression. I've heard a million stories about what they had to eat and what they didn't. I respect it entirely, but there are certain kinds of food that just, aren't appropriate for a food pantry. And some people just have a heck of a time throwing away food, no matter what it is what I'm trying to get to. And so that's something else that's important for us to think about as we not only accept food as donations, but as we serve the public. Now, so if you've got a common philosophy about how to serve people, we also want to keep in mind that our charitable food pantries, TEFAP or not TEFAP, are really a small piece of the food security puzzle. And the truth of the matter is that food share is really the largest volume of food going to households. And right now, all of our food pantries are being, I would say, fairly substantially impacted by the fact that food share right now remains at an extremely high level. And we've seen the impact of that on demand in our food pantries. Some of us have dropped off dramatically in certain places at certain times. And again, we have rises and falls, all of us do. But I think that once, food share is not going to stay at its maximum forever. And as soon as food share comes back down to what the past volumes have been, we are going to see an increase in food pantry traffic again. And so I want to remind us that back in June of 2020, because of the extraordinary volume of food that we were getting in, and because of the extraordinary need that we had, the TEFAP program lowered its eligibility level to invite people up to 300% of the federal poverty level to participate in TEFAP. It had been 185%. I imagine that when food share moves back towards its old allocation levels or somewhere around its old allocation levels, that's the point at which TEFAP will probably adjust again. And rather than going back to 185%, our plan is to go to 200% of poverty. So I expect that change on the horizon, but it really is going to be driven by how much food do we have? And we're starting to see a lower volume of food than we had been seeing, still abundant compared to what our past history has been. But once we see food share reduce, and once we see our volume really start to contract, that's when we'll move back to those earlier eligibility levels. I'm going to pause just for a second. Does anybody have a question on this topic before I move on? Hit the chat if you do. So when someone, any questions? Okay. So when somebody presents at our food pantries, at a TEFAP food pantry for service, if they look at the eligibility form, and we're going to have that form posted, in this case right now, we're using the COVID form, which is this Spanish and English version that has the 300% on it. And most of the folks that are doing drive-through outdoor distributions are using that adapted form. If somebody comes and declares that they are eligible at those income levels, you're going to serve them the first time no matter what, even if they live in another county or another location. So that's part of the federal rule of the program. And then after that, each time they come, they need to affirm that their income still falls within the eligibility level. Now, it looks like we have a question in the chat. And let's see, several. If we raise the eligibility requirements in the future, are people who are now eligible no longer going to be eligible? The answer to that question would be yes. If the poverty level eligibility goes to 200% and it's now 300%, those people between 201% and 300% would no longer be eligible for TEFAP. Okay, now you guys have other food besides TEFAP. So if somebody is not eligible for TEFAP, you can certainly serve that household non-TEFAP foods, so you don't have to turn them away. The trick is going to be, as it always is in food pantries, supply and demand. Do you have enough food to serve that household? And so that is really going to be up to you. All right, can we get the form F4059 in Spanish so we don't have to pay to have it translated? It actually is in Spanish. The current format that I just held up is in both English and Spanish. We also have the original form that you guys will recognize. It looks like this. Now that form we set aside for the outdoor distribution. Some of you decided to continue to use it, but most people are using the outdoor distribution form because it's so much easier to gather names. But we do have this standard form in English, Spanish, Hmong, and Russian. So once you guys start wanting to use those forms again, we will put those back up on the website. Right now, the only form that's on the website is the COVID distribution form in English and Spanish. All right, so, okay, and here's another question. Do we still document visitors that are non-TEFAP eligible? That's your choice. Pantries like to know who they're serving. And if I were operating a pantry, I would like to know who I was serving, whether or not they were TEFAP eligible. And if I were you, I would keep track of that family. I'd get the name and the address and the number of people, and I'd know how often I was serving them. It's not required in TEFAP. It's entirely up to you though, okay? So TEFAP records and information are confidential. And this is to some degree a result of the fact that this program is housed in the Department of Health Services. And by virtue of our department's standards, individual records are, in general, private records. And of course, most of those records are health related or Medicaid related or whatever, but we do have that standard in our department. And we also want to ensure that there's no stigma attached to getting food. And so we keep these records confidential. What that means is this: the person who gave you the information owns that record, and your pantry owns that record. So, and we've done this so that, for instance, if you ever decided that you no longer wanted to participate in TEFAP, if you wanted to withdraw from the program, the records that you collected for TEFAP, you could still keep and continue to use. And we don't want you dropping out of the program, but we realize that pantries have, things ebb and flow, and we want you to continue to serve people, whether or not you're part of this network. So the records belong to your organization, your 501c3, and the participant who gave you the information, and no one else. And nothing in those records is to be shared with anyone else. So, all right, let's see what questions we have in the chat. It says, we're still using the long registration form. Where can I get a copy? That registration form is on the DHS website. So if you go to dhs.wisconsin.gov, and put TEFAP in the search box, the forms should pop up for you. And if you have any problem whatsoever, you email me and I'll make sure that we get your problem fixed. So you should be able to access TEFAP forms on the website. Now I'll repeat, right now, we don't have all the original style forms on there. We only have the combined long form. But when we get to the fall, we're gonna move those forms back on the website. And if some of you feel like you need them before that, some of you have continued to keep using those short forms even during the pandemic. we can certainly make those forms available to you. We only put that long form on to avoid confusion. All right. Let's see. Another question in the box. Let's see. So the other thing about eligibility levels is when we change the eligibility level, we're going to give you time to let people know about that. And we'll give you some information to post that's going to make it clear. We won't just spring this on everybody. The group of folks that support your food pantries meet on a regular basis, and they are the group that advised us that we really should go to 300% with the amount of food that we have. And so they're going to be meeting again. We'll be discussing this again, and we'll give you plenty of notice and give you some assistance in terms of making that transition. Okay. Let's see. Somebody wanted to record this session. Bless you, you're more than welcome to record anything you want. So that was another thing in the chat. All right. Now, in terms of serving people in this program, we require identification. And we don't require photo identification. Some people think that we do, but we don't. Photo identification is nice because it's very easy to use and it's quick for the volunteer and it's simple, but we don't want that to be a barrier to getting food if somebody doesn't have a photo ID. So there are a number of forms of ID that are acceptable. And this is particularly true when we get to the household members. So the only person that has to show an ID every single time they get food is the head of the household who's picking up the food. So that has to happen every single time. In terms of knowing who the household is, when you set up that household's account, their TEFAP record, you're going to be asking the head of the household to provide you with some form of ID for each of the members of that household. Now, you only have to do that once in the TEFAP history with this household. We just need to make sure that we know who's in the household. However, every time somebody comes in for food, you need to ask them, has anything changed? Are all these folks still in your household? Occasionally, people will add people to their household. It's not uncommon, for instance, if a grandparent is taking grandchildren for the summer, for instance, to come into the household, it's perfectly fine for them to add those kids. At the end of the summer, they should be extracted if they're no longer there. So it's just up to the household, just like it is to report to be honest about their income, about who is in their household. Now, there's some question about what constitutes a household. Do people living together constitute a household? Maybe yes, and maybe no. The answer lies in the answer to this question. Do they share income? So if you've got a whole bunch of college students living in a 5-bedroom house, but they're independent of one another and do not share money, do not share income, then if all 5 of them are enrolled, you would have 5 TEFAP accounts at that address. If you have, there are other situations with roommates, but always go to the question, are you sharing income or not? And that's really the definitive issue in terms of what constitutes a household. So don't let it throw you, because once in a while you'll have 2 households at the same address. There's nothing wrong with that. All right. Let's see, other questions in the chat right now. Looking down the chat. Okay, so far we're good. Now, the other thing is TEFAP is it used to be 13 to 18% of the food that you're distributing. So now it's quite a bit more because the volume of food is more. And we also stopped, or I should say we suspended, I'll use that word. There was a requirement that for every bit of TEFAP you received, you also have matching food for that TEFAP. Well, when we got that enormous volume of trade mitigation food, and now this huge volume coming in related to the pandemic, we've basically suspended that requirement that you match that food. Now, you all are still bringing in additional food, but you don't have to match it. When we move out of this pandemic and move out of the food supply coming from the pandemic and go back to contract to a food supply that's, shall we say, smaller to some degree, we will then go back to the matching thing. But again, we will not spring any surprises on you. We will tell you what's going on. In terms of eligibility, once a year, and you can pick when you do this, it can be whenever fits your schedule and the volunteers that you have, you're going to be renewing a TEFAP person's eligibility. So you're just going to be checking you're going to check their ID, you're going to ask for proof of their address, and you're going to ask if all the members of the household are the same or if there are any changes. And you're going to ask them to basically attest to the fact that this is their household income. So that's just once a year, and we all do that to renew the TEFAP participation. And in many cases, there's not a lot of changes in households. Now, you're going to be collecting some information from households, and what we've collected has changed a little bit with the pandemic. You're all right now collecting the number of households you're serving on your days of service. You're collecting the number of persons you're serving. And you're also monthly, you're reporting the number of non-TEFAP pounds of food that you distribute. Before the pandemic, we were also collecting data by age. We were collecting children, non-senior adults, and senior adults. At some point in time, we may go back to that age collection. It helps us with our other program, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program that serves seniors. It helps us to see where we have concentrations of seniors in the state that might benefit from service. So somewhere down the road, again, you'll get plenty of notice. We may be going back to collecting that data. Let's see. If we don't have to match the food, do we still have to keep weighing that food that we provide now? Yes, we'd like you to weigh, we'd like to report the poundage of food that's been donated by the public, by a philanthropist. We would like you to just record each month how many pounds of food have been donated to your food pantry. It helps us look at the whole food picture to see how much is coming in that we're not providing. Because again, TEFAP is just a little piece of the puzzle. Here's a question: what kinds of ID are accepted? Almost anything that's reasonable. So the standard IDs, driver's licenses, state IDs, Badger Care, a Medicare or Medicaid card, even a piece of first class mail is acceptable. Most people, it's rare that people use first class mail as an ID, and it's not the best one, but it is acceptable. And you can ask somebody that brings in a piece of mail, hey, don't you have anything else? There's nothing wrong with asking for more, but it is acceptable. Okay, here's another question. When we re-verify once per year, do we need to verify all in the household members again with proof of ID again? Okay, the answer to that question is partly yes and partly no. So when you verify annually, you're asking, you want to make sure that the household still lives where it lives. You're looking at the ID of the person who gets the food, and you're asking them, are these people still in the household? But no, you do not have to ask for the IDs of all the people in the household every year. You only have to do that once in their TEFAP enrollment. Now, if you had a household that was enrolled in TEFAP, and let's say they stopped coming and you pulled their record because they've not been there, and then suddenly they come back, you're going to start a new record, and in that case you should ask for those IDs because you're essentially starting over. But just remember this: every time they get food, they're attesting to the fact that what's on that form is true, which means who lives in the household and the address, and the fact that they're not going to sell the food or give it away or trade it, that the food is only for their household use. You know, and essentially by accepting the food, they're entering into a covenant with your food pantry that these things are true, and that's why they can use this food. So the annual renewal is a formality, but you're almost in a way doing a mini renewal every time you give food away. Now, during the, circumstances are much easier when we're inside and communicating person to person most clearly. It's simpler to do that. But every time they take food, they need to be eligible to take food. All right, what age is considered the minimum age for senior adults? Well, on the TEFAP form, it's 60 plus. CSFP, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, starts at 60. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why it's 60 on TEFAP, because we're trying to identify people that are 60 and older. All right. Will DHS be publishing an updated TEFAP manual? Yes. We will be doing that in October when the contracts come out for each of your regional partners who are working alongside of you and making sure that your pantry gets food and the support that you need. You'll be signing a new site agreement, and there will be an updated manual. The manual doesn't change very much. It's pretty much the same. And what I like to do for our regional folks that work with you is just point out anything that's different. It's very hard to find a new thing when you're looking through the same manual. You might not even notice it. So what we try to do is we usually send out a cover memo with the manual that basically says on page 6, this is different. On page 4, this is different, or whatever. We don't want anybody to be surprised. So we'll do a good job of letting you know there's a difference. Will DHS be publishing an updated civil rights training? Yes, there's a civil rights set of PowerPoint slides in the back of your manual. And right now, I know of no changes to it. USDA, it was going to train states on the 21st of July, and they have since moved the training to August 1st. Now, I'm waiting to find out from USDA, hey, you guys, are there any changes in the civil rights training? But right now, there are none that I know of. So we're going to go ahead as we planned and do that civil rights training on the 26th of July. And if there are changes after I go through that training with USDA, I will update those slides, and those changes will be reflected in the next civil rights training. And we don't have further training scheduled yet, but we will publish a list of training dates. We'll do at least 2 or 3 so that you have an opportunity to get other people in as well as yourselves. And we'll try to stagger the days and times that we do this, because Monday at 1 o'clock might not work for some people, and we realize that. And so we could maybe try to do something on a Friday or, you know, some other day of the week. And if you really, really need help and Feed My People is willing, I would be willing to do this on a Saturday if it would be helpful to you guys in terms of helping your folks get trained in civil rights. But right now, the civil rights slides at the back of your TEFAP manual are as current as I know about. And so they're good to go. All right. Any other questions so far? Whoops. Where did I go? Okay. I got lost for a second. All righty. We are not going to talk about limited English proficiency today because that's a civil rights issue. So when we do the civil rights training, we'll be talking about limited English proficiency. But we want to make sure that we serve everybody to the best of our ability. And as we know, some people are more difficult to serve than others. So everybody should have a language line for limited English proficiency. Again, we'll talk about that later. But there are other things we all have to think about. And one is, if we ask somebody to fill out a form, not everybody has literacy skills that enable them to read and write. And once in a while, we will run across a participant, a neighbor, a client, whatever your pantry calls them, that isn't able to do that. And I think this is where, I think the intake person at the desk is a really important person. They're kind of the surrogate for your whole operation. They're the front door of your welcome to people. And if in guiding people through the process, if the person is astute enough, they may, if they see somebody hesitating, they might ask the participant, would it be helpful if I fill this out for you? Rather than, you know, asking them if they can do it themselves. Again, we're just looking for the best service we can provide with dignity. You know, if we think that somebody is misrepresenting their income, and occasionally we might think that, we have no way to verify that or prove that, and that is not our job. Now, having said that, if you have reason to believe, and again, we are not the food police, so we are not investigating people, but there's nothing wrong with talking to a household in private, not in front of other people, but just saying, I just wanted to double check that you understand the income guidelines for this program. And this is what they are. And just so you know, we have other food that we can give you if these income guidelines don't fit your household. But give people an opportunity to be honest with you. You can have that conversation, and you can do it in such a way that that person's dignity is still intact, and you can also offer them food. But if you feel that's something you need to do and you feel like you have good reason to do it, that is an option for you. A great question. What if somebody asks for more food? My answer is give them more food if you can. If the supply of food that you have on hand is sufficient to serve people, and by giving them additional food, you're not shorting another household, I certainly would. And I think that, again, the person at the front desk is really, really important. If they can flag you, if somebody really feels like they need to have a conversation about getting additional food, we don't want them to have that conversation in front of other people that are waiting. So again, you know, offering them dignity and giving them a chance to talk about it. let's see. I see some other questions about food. I'm gonna finish this little thing. What if I believe somebody has recently obtained food from another pantry? Serve them. Serve them. I've in my own travels around the state and doing pantry reviews, I ended up seeing the same mom in 3 different food pantries in the same day, and she needed the food. Just serve them. Okay, things like alcohol. What if I think someone has been drinking? What do I do? Well, I would ask this question for anybody. If you are serving someone that is challenging, belligerent, whatever, the first question is, if they show up in a food pantry, they need food. So we already know that. So if you smell alcohol on somebody's breath, should you serve them? My short answer is, of course you should serve them. They have an addiction. Now, if they're causing a problem, that's a separate issue. We never, ever want to put ourselves or our volunteers at risk from somebody, whether it's somebody who's having a problem with alcohol or someone who's got a health issue that affects their cognitive function. And we do have folks that have all kinds of disabilities. Quite a lot of the people, as we know, that we serve have physical or mental or emotional challenges. And as long as they're not going to harm anybody, we need to serve them. Once you feel like that you need to be concerned for anybody's safety, then you just need to call law enforcement, and you should do it really without hesitation. And just because law enforcement shows up doesn't mean they're going to come in there, full barrel tilted. When you talk to them on the phone, you can tell them what's wrong. And good law enforcement knows how to handle people well without strong arming them and without violence. But you absolutely want that household to still get food. And even if you decide that somebody is such a challenge that you can't manage them, someone else can come in and pick up the food for that household. But you don't want to penalize anybody with food because of behavioral issues. At the same time, you have a right to be safe, and you should be safe. Let's see. Now, how is it best to help with a TEFAP household that's homebound? Well, there's a couple of options there. All TEFAP foods can be distributed to somebody that we call a proxy. So when someone signs up for the program, it's really smart to ask them, hey, if you can't pick up your food, is there a person who you could designate that could do it for you? And get that person's name and get their address or their phone number. And then they're going to have to show an ID when they come in. It's so much easier to get that proxy right when you sign up the household if they can give you a name, because then you don't have to worry about it. So the simplest way is by proxy. That can be a family member or a household member. It could be a neighbor. In some cases, there are social workers that have folks that they work with on a regular basis. And in some cases, social workers pick up food for households. Sometimes they pick it up for more than one household. And if they do that, you have a confidentiality agreement that's part of your volunteer relationships with people. They just need to sign your confidentiality agreement if they're going to multiple households to deliver food. So let's see. Let's see. It says, we let people send a letter giving permission with IDs if the person cannot come in. That's a fine, absolutely fine choice. You could also do it over the phone if you're comfortable with that, but that's a fine choice too. Let's see, here's a question about donated food. Does the donated food coming from the community still need to be quarantined before sorting and distributing? If so, how long? So I'm going to talk about the pandemic for a minute. We're still in a situation where there's a deadly disease circulating in our state. We are getting more and more vaccinated every day as Wisconsinites, but the rate at which we are getting vaccinated is slowing down. So the other problem is that the Delta variant, which is the variant that first became very visible in India, has moved overseas, and now in the United Kingdom, the Delta variant is the most virulent version of this disease, and it is more transmissible. It's more easily transmissible, and so far it seems to have a greater detrimental effect, especially on younger people. And right now, younger people, in terms of how we vaccinated and who we allowed to be vaccinated, are the least vaccinated people. And if you look at the data about who is getting the COVID variants right now, whichever variant it is, the 14 to 17-year-old group is the highest. And then below that, it's the 9 to 13-year-old group. So this disease is still spreading among young people more. Secondly, we have to remember that this disease can get transmitted without any symptoms or signs that someone has it. And just because you're vaccinated doesn't mean that you can't transmit this disease. It also doesn't mean that you can't contract it. What it does mean is that if you get it, your chances of being hospitalized are much reduced. Your chances of going on a ventilator are much reduced. In other words, the vaccination really keeps the virus at bay, but it doesn't guarantee you can't either get it or transmit it. So that's why we are being very cautious about welcoming people back into inside spaces. I don't think we're ready to do it. Now, pantries can make independent decisions. And because you're independent 501c3s, but please remember, we have an extremely vulnerable population that we're serving because so many of our folks have disabilities. And then we have a very vulnerable population that's serving them because we have so many seniors in this group. So this is a safety matter. And all of us are sick and tired of being inside. All of us are sick and tired of not seeing people. And we also know that people's interactions in a food pantry can be a real important social moment for them. And, you know, a number of food pantries actually accentuate that by offering, you know, coffee and cookies, or, you know, a chance for people to sit down and talk to one another. And all of us miss that. But we are not out of the woods yet. And I would strongly advise you to stick to the plan of outdoor distribution. Keep the masks on. The masks are the simplest, easiest, cheapest way to keep this from spreading. And as of the next few months go by, hopefully we will be better positioned in terms of vaccinations. And the vaccinations are opening up to kids now. We just need to wait a little longer. So I'm going to say it again. If you don't want to follow the guidance I'm giving you, you can make that choice. But just remember what you're exposing people to if you do make that choice. And again, in Wisconsin, we're a tourist state. So we're going to get people traveling from all over the place, coming up here to go fishing, to be in a cabin, to whitewater raft, to camp, to do whatever. And nobody has any control over where people go or what people do. The only thing that you can control is what happens in your food pantry. So All right. So I'm still advising people, and it's not just me, it's the TEFAP advisory team. And I also communicated with the doctor that's in charge of public health in my department and the doctor that's in charge of infectious disease. And I gave them the guidance and I said, what do you think about this? Is this too much? Is this too little? And they said, no, 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 this is just right. So that's the story on the pandemic. And we're planning to try to go back to something that more approaches normal by the beginning of October. And I owe you guys notes from Friday the 11th. We had a really beautiful conversation with 5 panelists from food pantries who shared their perspectives about what they think they're going to be thinking about and also what they've learned from the pandemic. And we'll be getting you those notes to review this week. Okay. Let's take a look now at, let's see if we have any more questions in the, oh, the donated food need to be quarantined. If I were handling food that somebody gave me, I would put it I would store it in a place where the temperature is safe for food storage. So between 50 and 70 degrees, because I'm assuming this is shelf stable food. And I would leave it alone for a few days and then I'd put it away. And I don't think you need to wipe down every can of tuna. I just think you need to let that stuff sit for a little while safely in a safe environment, and then you can use it. Let's see. Does TEFAP have guidance on vaccination rates or infection and/or positivity rates as determining factors? I'm not sure completely how to answer that question. The front half of that question I can answer. The Department of Health Services has a really useful website. And it's when you open it up, it's COVID. It opens up to COVID. And what you can do is if you take 20 minutes to walk through it and familiarize yourself with it, it has reporting rates all the way down to the county level. And it also shows variance. So you can take a look at your own county and you can see what's going on there. Now, again, remember, if somebody's coming up from Chicago, that's not going to count in what shows in your county. It'll only show up later as the numbers change. But I would encourage you, if you want to take a look at your very local area, go to the DHS website and spend a little time looking at that. It's a useful piece of information. Let's see. I think those are most of the questions on chat. Did I get to them all? Looking, yeah, I think so. Let's see. I think that we've covered most of the service bits for this. A couple other pieces. If your food pantry is associated with an organization that provides other services to people, and I think a Salvation Army is a really good example of this. They often provide housing assistance or shelter or other services. They collect data in order to provide those services. And in some cases, they need to, for their funding source, collect things like their social security numbers. But they can do that and do that, but they keep those data completely separate from their TEFAP records. And so if you're an organization that does provide multiple services, you have an obligation to make sure that you keep those records separate. The other thing is we don't want you collecting any information that is not part of the requirements. So, do not photocopy IDs and keep them. Just don't do that. All you're keeping is the information that's on the TEFAP form. It's very, very simple for you. I want to say that I think that during this pandemic, and forget the pandemic, before the pandemic, the food pantries in Wisconsin have been doing an extraordinary job of serving households and moving food to people that need it. And this pandemic and even the days before that, when we had this mountain of food, I've just been struck over and over again at how organized you are, at how committed you are, and at just the phenomenal work that you're doing. And this pandemic, easing out of it in some ways is going to be a little bit more challenging than going into it, because going into it, basically the word was everybody outside, we're going to simplify distribution. Bringing people back into our spaces is a little bit trickier. And as we get to the fall, you're going to be wanting to make a plan for how to do that that's comfortable and that you feel that's safe. And again, I'll be sending those notes out from the meeting on the 11th, but there was some great suggestions in there. And it does sound like quite a number of people are going to be continuing to do some outdoor distribution, partly because some people just plain out and out want to continue it. And I think that, you know, some of the lessons that we've come away with are going to be very, very helpful to folks. All right, let me look at the chat here. Let's see, on the ID verification, what do we do with undocumented people since they don't have any official proof of identification? What you do is you do the same thing that you do for somebody who is homeless, somebody who is a victim of domestic violence and doesn't feel comfortable giving an address to you. You just use the address of a public building in your community and just use the same address all the time. And when you see that card, what that tells you is this person does not have to provide me with an ID, and there's a good reason why not. And the reason is either they're undocumented, they have domestic violence concerns for their safety, or they're homeless. And truly, it's nobody's business why. And again, this is the care that you really want to have with the intake person. But again, undocumented people, serve them and just use the same address. And in the USDA guidelines, they say the nearest Social Security office, but in rural Wisconsin, that could be anywhere. So the public library is perfectly fine. The local high school is perfectly fine. Any public building, and just use the same address. All righty, let's see. Let's see. Could you use your pantry address? I don't see any reason why not. Yeah, you could use your pantry address. I don't see why not. The address won't match where the person lives in either case, so you could, particularly if you're in a city where there is no, or a town or a village where there is no public building. That's a good option. We are almost at the end of our time. I'm just wondering if anybody has anything else they'd like to add or any further questions. We're just a couple of minutes away from our hour. Let's see. Oh, a minor. Oh, this is good. I'm glad you brought this up. A minor who said she was living in a shelter. How do you handle this? You should serve a minor who appears and wants to enroll in TEFAP. We have some kids that are not safe at home and they're navigating difficult circumstances. And these are rare, guys. This isn't going to happen every day. But if a minor comes in and tells you they're homeless, or they're not or they're living somewhere else and they need food, please serve them. Please serve them. And the other thing I want to tell you is there are some folks that are trying to start backpack programs. And I applaud that. TEFAP and backpacks are a little bit tricky because you have to have a record of household distribution. So if you are working with a school that has a backpack program and you find that there are some TEFAP foods that are suitable for backpack distribution, you're going to have to enroll that household at the school in the backpack program, and you're going to have to keep a record of what you distributed. That's a non-negotiable at the federal level. You have to. You can still do it. The other challenge with TEFAP, though, as we know, is that some of those foods, you know, you're not going to give a kid a 5-pound frozen pork loin roast, you know. So some of the foods, a lot of the TEFAP foods aren't as suitable for giving to kids to take home in a backpack, but it can be done. You just have to follow the rules. All right, we're at 2 o'clock. Let's see, what about families that send their child to get the food? I think you better use your judgment in that situation. I'd be a little concerned about a child that was coming to my food pantry to pick up food for the whole household. And I personally wouldn't refuse to serve the kid, but there's nothing wrong with making a follow-up call if you feel like you need to that household to talk to somebody there. If your sense says is that, I think you just have to use your judgment and assess the situation. And this is a situation where I would tell the person who's intaking to call the food pantry manager over and have them make that decision in that transaction. That could be a tricky situation. Okay, everybody, you've weathered another whole hour of this. Oh, the agenda references food preferences. Did I miss what this discussion was? No, you didn't miss it. We didn't get to it, but I will add that to the list of things we talk about when we talk about operations in our next meeting, which is, if you'd like to join us, managing operations is on July 28th. And I'll make sure that we put food preferences on that list of things to talk about. I think that we're done for today. I really appreciate the time that you gave to be part of this today and all the work you're doing. Thanks for everything, and we'll see you in a week if you can. Bye, everybody.